On September 11th, 2001, after burning for 7 hours, World Trade Center Building 7 collapsed at 5:20 p.m. The facts behind the collapse make less and less sense the more you look into it. So follow me down the rabbit hole about World Trade Center Building 7. Hi friends, and welcome back to the rabbit hole. My name is Dani and I'm your host. And today we are talking about World Trade Center Building 7. Basically like the forgotten building, because everyone knows that the Twin Towers collapsed. Everyone knows, the Pentagon, but people forget about Building 7. So this is part 2 of our 3-part episode on 9/11. So if you haven't listened to part 1, I am going to reference it a bit. So I would definitely suggest go back, listen to part 1. It's all about the Twin Towers, World Trade Centers, Towers 1 and 2. Today we're talking about Building 7. I want to again apologize for last week. Things have been a little hectic around my life, but I'm here with more episodes and more things for you all. So, welcome back. If you're new here, welcome. I know we have a lot of new followers, so I really appreciate you all. And this has been quite the hole that I've fallen down. So the show is obviously called The Rabbit Hole for a reason. I feel like every single week I fall down a rabbit hole for you, and then I give you as much information as possible. This building, there's so many questions. There's so many things that are unanswered about it. Nothing makes sense. Like, there is a NIST report, just like there was for buildings 1 and 2, but it makes less sense than the Twin Towers. Like, the Twin Towers, you could, almost maybe, if you squint your eyes and turn your head to the left, make it work, There's no way you're making this work. So let's get into it. Building 7 is a 47-story building, and it is located just north of Towers 1 and 2. So basically, there's Tower 2, and then Tower 1. Tower 2 is, the furthest south, and then Tower 1, then Building 6, and then Building 7 is across the street. So Building 6 was, I don't want to say unharmed. I don't know much about it, but it did not collapse. I'm sure it was harmed because the 2 towers right next to it, all the towers basically around it, collapsed. But Building 6 is potentially still standing. Building 7, however, burned for a while. 7 hours. It burned for 7 hours. So basically, 10 stories of this building caught fire. Levels 7 through 9 and 11 through 13 basically burned out of control. The sprinkler system failed to engage, allowing the fires to basically just rage on. That comes straight from the NIST report. If you don't remember NIST, National Institute for Standards and Technology, they did the investigation for Towers 1 and 2 and for Tower 7. FEMA also did an investigation for Tower 1 and 2. It was not as in-depth, so NIST stepped in, did another one. They were like, yeah, we could do better. And I don't know if they did. Again, if you haven't listened to the first part of this series, go back and listen to part 1. It's 3 weeks ago now. In between it, we did Pearl Harbor, and then I had a little, I'm not putting out an episode. It was a minute long. But, yeah, so basically, the fires just kept firing. They just kept on going because the sprinkler systems were just not engaging. They weren't working, and they didn't think it was weird that the sprinkler systems just happened to not work. After witnessing the other 2 towers falling, nobody thought to question this, oh, that's odd that the sprinkler systems just don't work in this tower. Or maybe just on the floors that are on fire. Anyway, I do want to preface this by saying Building 7 was already evacuated by the time it collapsed. No one died in Building 7 because when obviously Towers 1 and 2 fell earlier that morning, they basically evacuated everyone. They were like, yeah, we're not dealing with this. We don't know what's going on. They evacuated most of Lower Manhattan, I think. But Also, the firefighters, all the first responders, all these people that would be there fighting this fire in Building 7, they weren't paying attention to Building 7 because they knew, number one, that all the people were evacuated. Number two, I'm sure they thought that maybe the sprinkler systems would engage. Also, this was the first time in history that buildings had collapsed from just being on fire. So the likelihood of 3 buildings in one day collapsing from being on fire is slim. It happened, but it's not expected. And they were still working in the rubble to try to get all the people that they could try to find out of buildings 1 and 2, out of the debris from that, because there was a lot of people trapped in those buildings when they fell. So they were working on that. Building 7 really just wasn't a priority at this point. So the NIST report goes something like this. Quote, heat from the uncontrolled fires caused thermal expansion of the steel beams on the lower floors of the east side of World Trade Center 7, damaging the floor framing on multiple floors, unquote. So basically like a girder beam, which is a cross-member structural support beam, basically, failed on the 13th floor, pulled away from an important column 79. We'll get into that. This will be really important. So this girder, column 79, these are very important keys. So this is the NIST report. This is straight from them. So basically the girder pulled away from an important column and caused the 13th floor to collapse and all the floors beneath it down to the 5th floor. So everything between like number 13 fell all the way down to everything caught at level 5. The important column number 79 was left exposed, basically, and unsupported, and caused the collapse of the rest of the building. I mean, this is what NIST put out. Honestly, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. They're basically saying like one structural beam can cause an entire building to fall, which like it just doesn't make any sense. No matter which way you look at it, there's just not a lot of sense being made here. I'm not a structural engineer. I don't know much about building things. My husband is a handyman. He's not like a general contractor. He's just a handyman. Like, we know very basics about basic things, but like I'm not a structural engineer, and I can tell you that this just seems very, very odd. So basically, like, have you ever played Jenga? Like the game with all the blocks? So if this was a game of Jenga, and I actually used this analogy when I was talking to my husband, and he told me to write it down. So if you pull out one block, the entire tower would collapse. If this was Jenga, right? So you just pull out like one, we'll call it like a side block, right? So, you got three blocks and then 3 blocks stacked on top of it in the opposite direction. You pull out one of the side blocks, basically the entire tower should collapse going straight down. That is not how Jenga works. If you've ever played Jenga, like you can pull out both side blocks and just have one middle block holding an entire tower all the way up, and it won't collapse. I mean, it will if it's shook, but I don't know. So basically, you're telling me like Jenga is more structurally sound than a 47-story building in downtown New York City? I'm not buying it. And guess what? A lot of other people didn't buy it either. So back to these fun people, the architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth. They have a 5-part series on World Trade Center Building 7. However, I only found 2 parts of it, which honestly, these 2 parts have enough evidence to like convince me that this is a little fishy, that some weird things are going on. So let's get into it. NIST wanted everyone to just like believe them at their word, and basically no one could attempt to question them. They said no questions. This is what it is. This is our report. Believe us or don't, but this is what it is. That's it. Don't question us. But we've all been through high school science, and any good scientific research is questioned and can be replicated by others. And you shouldn't just take anybody at their word. Basically, you should ask these questions, and honestly, NIST should basically encourage people to ask them questions to try to make sure that they have got the whole truth. Make sure that what they have put out, everything that they've done, is actually scientifically proven and scientifically sound, that nothing is a little wobbly, but that's not what they wanted. They didn't want that. They wanted you to just believe them.
Did you know that over 40% of Americans have a hard time swallowing pills? So when it's time to take your vitamins, large capsules and pills are out of the question. We know that gummy vitamins exist, but they're full of sugar, they get stuck in your teeth, and they only contain a fraction of the nutrients you need. Luckily, Easy Melts has discovered the ultimate vitamin sweet spot. Vitamins that melt in your mouth, taste like a treat, and are packed with nutrients ready for absorption, all without an ounce of sugar. For a limited time, Easy Melts is giving listeners a free 3-month supply of vitamin D3 with their first purchase. To claim your free D3 vitamins, visit try.easymelts.com/spring24. That's melts.com/spring24. Say goodbye to the old way of taking your vitamins and say hello to the easy way. Menopausal and perimenopausal women, listen up. It's time to take control of your health and comfort, and Winona is here to help. Winona is a telemedicine company for menopause care who believes that your symptoms are real, important, and deserve to be taken seriously. And for many women, this starts with hormone replacement therapy. Winona's HRT is made with plant-based, bioidentical hormones rather than synthetic ones, so it better aligns with your body to offer relief from hot flashes, weight gain, and other uncomfortable symptoms. 80% of women who use Winona find relief within just 90 days. So, what are you waiting for? Get started today. Visit buywinona.com today to start your free visit. With free shipping and the ability to pause or cancel at any time, your path to wellness has zero obligations. Use code SPRING24 at buywinona.com for 25% off your first treatment plan. That's BYWINONA.com for 25% off. Winona. Menopause care made easy.
In 2009, NIST received 2 different Freedom of Information Act requests. So one was for the computer modeling data that they used to basically recreate this collapse, and NIST just went ahead and classified the data. They were like, yeah, they quote, might jeopardize public safety, unquote. So if we release this, you guys might use it to collapse other buildings. So we're just going to classify it, which there's other computer modeling data softwares out there. There's other computer modeling softwares. You can recreate a collapse if you want to. I don't know, like, it doesn't make a lot of sense that they would classify it, but that's what they did. They're like, yep, public safety, because that's a cop-out. The second one was for the text of interviews with the witnesses who reported explosions inside Building 7. Of course, they denied this request as well, saying that these interviews, quote, were not directly related to the building failure, unquote. Oh, okay. So people actually heard explosions. And some people said gunfire, similar to what they said about World Trade Center Towers 1 and 2. 1 and 2, excuse me. But yeah, it's not related. No explosions are related, and these witnesses are stupid, basically. They didn't say that, but if you read between the lines. NIST has replied to some Freedom of Information Acts. However, in their responses, they failed to include drawings of structural elements that are vital to understanding the building collapse. Or they were very vague. So they would either be very vague and they wouldn't provide all the information. So even with their vagueness, you might be able to like decrypt it if you had like a drawing of what they were talking about. But no, they're like, yeah, you'll figure it out. On several occasions, NIST has ignored basic questions from other engineers about decisions they made during the computer modeling that would have directly affected the results of the analysis. So we're going to get into this in depth, but they left out several things to make the collapse what they wanted it to be, which again, we saw with Towers 1 and 2, but this building, like Towers 1 and 2 actually had a plane hit them. Like 2 planes, we saw it with our own eyes. There's videos, we can go back, we can look. Actually flew into these buildings. Planes full of people flew into these buildings and caused an explosion of jet fuel. Again, I went through all of this in the last episode, but like Building 7 didn't have that. Building 7 caught fire from falling debris from Tower 1. That's it. That's how it caught fire. Falling debris, fell down, caught multiple stories on fire, but 7 through 9 and 11 through 13 burned the hardest, or burned the hottest and the most aggressive. Guys, I'm frustrated with the research that I found. It was good research, but here we are. Because of all this vagueness, basically, in the spring of 2020, a request for correction under the Delta Quality Act was submitted when 10 9/11 families, 88 architects and engineers, and the organization Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth all got together and submitted this. The Delta Quality Act is a law that enables the public to seek correction for information disseminated by federal agencies. NIST is obviously a federal agency. The request asked the agency to revise 8 areas of the report that were argued to be in violation of the agency's information quality standards. Basically, you put out this information, it sucks. Can you just look it over again and throw out your probable cause sequence and develop a new probable collapse that is physically possible and consistent with the available evidence. That's a direct quote from Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. Basically, Architects and Engineers wanted them to say that it was controlled demolition. They didn't straight out say that in their Delta Quality Act, request for correction, but that's what they put it on their website. I took it right off their website. And again, all the sources, everything I used in the show notes, but there's a lot of information, and I tried to condense it and make it more understandable for you all. You can read it. I'm not trying to persuade you to not read it. Go ahead and read it. But basically, yeah, they wanted NIST to say that it was controlled demolition. In August of 2020, NIST denied the request. In September of 2020, they, being the families and the architects and engineers and all them, appealed that decision. They expected another deny, and that's exactly what they got. Because NIST was like, yeah, no, we're not putting our reputation on the line for you people. So in June of 2021, this was basically a final decision issued by NIST. They're like, nope, we're denying this request. We're not doing it. Which, okay. But in September of 2021, because they were expecting this deny, only a few days before the 20th anniversary of 9/11, the architects, engineers, and the families and all those people, they filed a lawsuit against NIST. And in the lawsuit, they essentially argued that NIST's response to the request for correction was so technically deficient and irrational that it did not actually constitute a real response under the Delta Quality Act. Yeah, so basically they have to submit something. They have to give something back. So here's some data that the architects and engineers, 9/11 Truth, again, on their website, this is what they put out. They're trying to put out on their website to show people, NIST, this is what NIST put out, and this is why it's not 100% true. So let's get into it, because this is the meat and potatoes of this whole episode. This is where things get real fishy. So hold on to your hats, people. Also, a lot of technical terms. If you are a structural engineer, maybe you can explain it better. I'm going to explain it the best I can with the, little bit of knowledge and the Googling that I did. I understand it because I saw a lot of the diagrams that they were showing, so I'm going to explain it the best I can. So basically 3 reasons that the girder couldn't have fallen, because that's their biggest thing, is that this girder on level 13 failed. It fell off the column 79, and that's it fell down and caused a collapse of several floors, and then basically a collapse of the whole building. That's what NIST put out. Well, there's multiple reasons that this girder couldn't fall. So basically, web stiffeners is reason number 1. Reason number 2 is that column 79 side plate. Basically, there's a side plate on that column that would have literally stopped the girder from falling. And the east beam, there was another beam that basically had to expand enough to push the girder free. And we're going to get into that. So if you don't know, web stiffeners are supports along joints of beams that reinforce the beam to each other to prevent crippling. If NIST had actually included the web stiffeners in their computer modeling data, in their probable cause sequence, it would actually make their probable cause sequence physically impossible, because that it secured that girder to where it wouldn't basically like walk off its seat on column 79. So without the web stiffeners, that's the only way that the girder could have walked off its seat on column 79 and collapsed, right? Well, the girder actually had to move a substantial ways, like I have it the exact amount, hold on, 3.678 inches for like before it would be able to just like fall off the column. And the only way this would be able to work is if there were no web stiffeners and the columns around the girder expanded from heat well before the girder actually expanded from the heat. So this is a direct quote off the website. Quote, but as the request for correction noted, at the temperature NIST determined for the girder's connections at column 79 to fail so that the girder could move freely, which was 164 degrees Celsius, the girder would already have expanded enough to move within the envelope of column 79's side plate. Moreover, the request for correction noted that careful review of NIST's fire simulations show that girder to A 2001, which is just the girder number. Every girder and beam have numbers and different things. Would have reached 164 degrees Celsius long before the beams to its east were heated sufficiently to push the girder to the west at least 3.678 inches, which is the distance from that girder A 2001's original position to column 79's side plate. Based on NIST's coefficients of thermal expansion, 3.678 inches of thermal expansion would not be reached in the floor beam closest to column 79, which they give that beam number to, which I don't think it matters, until around 430 degrees Celsius, at which point girder alpha 2001, even if at a lower temperature than the floor beams, would be well within the envelope of column 79's side plate. So, unquote, So basically, the side plate would have prevented the girder from falling off that beam, 79 beam. And that's what the request for correction was asking them to look at again. NIST only responded with the relationship of the girder and the column at room temperature, which is basically irrelevant. But let's just say, for argument's sake, that what NIST is saying is true. We'll give them the benefit of the doubt here. What they're saying is true. Well, that means that the beam on the east side of the girder would have to expand and push the girder off the column 79. That is physically impossible for that beam to expand that far. This beam wouldn't have expanded enough to push the girder off its seat, let alone past the side plate. So, yes, in a heated situation, metal expands. Metal does not expand and expand and it's not like one of those little pill things you put in water and it becomes a dinosaur. It's metal. It expands to a certain amount and then it also retracts to a certain amount when it's cold. They probably accounted for this when, the architects and engineers before they built the building. I mean, I would assume that they would account for something like this. So basically the collapse of the 13th floor it's just a little fishy, like I said earlier. So if for whatever reason the girder did get free and fall, it wouldn't have been enough weight to make the 12th floor collapse or all the other subsequent floors below that down to level 5. So basically level 13 would have collapsed. Sure. Okay. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt that the girder got free and it collapsed onto the 12th floor. The 12th floor would have held. And here's the facts behind that. If just one girder had fallen and caused a collapse on that side of the building, it would have been about 62,000 pounds onto the 12th floor. That's at room temperature. But of course, the building had been on fire for 7 hours. Well, let's call it 6.5 hours, right? Because we'll just assume, I don't know the exact numbers, but we're going to assume that this collapse happened and then a few minutes later, the whole building collapsed. This didn't all happen like one right after the other. 6.5 hours. I'm being generous here. This building had been on fire for 6.5 hours. So all the things like that were on fire were basically not there anymore. They were burned up. They were ash, and it didn't weigh that much anymore. Things were basically gone. Okay, cool. So at room temperature, 62,000 pounds, about. It's a little less than that. I just rounded up. So here's some facts for you. Quote, however, the impact force required to shear the floor 12 girders connecting to column 79 from the northwest and south, there's parentheses here, there was no girder connecting the column 79 from the east, would have been 632,000 pounds, 645,000 pounds, and 407,000 pounds, respectively. So you're telling me you would have needed 100 times what that floor would have weighed to shear the girders on the next floor down. I hope I'm saying this word right. I looked it up before because it's a weird word. It's spelled weird. I could be making a fool of myself and calling it the wrong word this entire episode. So if that's the case, I apologize, everyone. Make fun of me on your own. So according to NIST, the north girders on floors 8 through 12 were fully intact, even though the one on the 13th floor was not. So the north girder on the 13th floor, that's the one that collapsed. They also say that the west girder on the 12th floor was damaged, which I don't know. Here's another quote. So with the floor 12 girder to the north still connected to column 79, after floor 13's collapse, the floor 12 girder to the west having already fallen, we are left to assume that the walk-off of floor 13's girder, Alpha 2001, on the north side of column 79 somehow broke the girder connections on floor 12's girder, Alpha 2002, on the south side of column 79. But the only way this could conceivably have happened was if girder Alpha 2002's connection to column 79 were already damaged. That's interesting information there. So, like I said, I only found 2 parts of the 5-part series. If I find the other 3 parts, I looked everywhere. I don't know if they've actually come out with them yet because these 2 parts are pretty recent. You have to imagine, this request for correction has been pretty recent, and so all this information they're coming out with this year. When I find parts 3, 4, and 5, I'll do an amendment to this episode. But until then, I've got some things to think about and some questions that I've asked because I am so confused. I've got so many questions. First of all, where did NIST come up with this information? Has anybody asked that question? Did they just decide that this was good? How do you come up with that specific girder on that specific floor? From that specific column, that building collapsed. There was nothing left. It was debris. It was rubble. How do you know? You just decided, you just had a hint. Maybe if there's architects or engineers that are listening to this, please write me a message and tell me how they can come up with this information. Because they were so steadfast. It was the 13th floor girder, this specific one that fell off this specific column because this other specific beam expanded and caused it to. It's just very, very specific for a site that they are looking at a pile of rubble, and this is how they decided. Again, I don't work in this industry. It just seems very strange. Also, why did the building fall at free fall speeds or nearly free fall speeds? Like, why did it fall so fast? I don't know. And again, like, there was the Freedom of Information Act about the witnesses. So why did they keep that information? Why were they quieted? Why was that information withheld? Because in doing this research, also doing the research for the Towers 1 and 2, I watched a lot of controlled demolition videos. Also, they're really fun to watch if you ever are in that kind of mood. They're fun. My husband watched them with me because, like, who doesn't want to watch a controlled demolition video? And there's a lot of them on YouTube. Well, when you watch these videos, you'll notice that you'll hear a bunch of explosions, like a bunch of little explosions, basically like gunshots that are going off, and then like a big explosion, the whole building falls. And that happens in almost every single one of them. I don't want to say every single one, I could be wrong, but most of them that I watched, that's what happened. It's because those first explosions, those gunshots that you're hearing, I mean, quote unquote gunshots, right? Those little explosions you're hearing, that's actually, they put copper on the beams, on the steel beams, and the copper explodes through the steel beams. The melted copper will actually like melt through the beam and cause it to, if it's exploded in the right way. I mean, I'm no demolition expert, but this is what I found on YouTube. Thank you, YouTube. It will cause, like, it cuts through the beams, and then after all those are done, it has one big, boom, and it falls down, causes all the rest. Like the main beam is, exploded, and the whole building falls. Well, you hear all those little, like, gunfire, basically gunshots, and that's all the beams, the supporting beams, being cut by the copper, and then the whole building falls. If that's what was heard with buildings 1, 2, and 7, it makes you start to really think, like, if this just happened to collapse, if what they are putting out there is true, and these buildings just fell because of a plane hit it or fire or whatever they want to say, you wouldn't hear all those little gunshots. Like, you wouldn't hear that. That would not be a thing. And in NIST's press conference, they actually said that there was no explosions. There was no witnesses heard that, which is false. There's audio recordings, there's video recordings, there's witnesses that do say that they've heard that for building 7 and for building 1 and 2. So, I mean, it might have been a controlled demolition. Let's be honest here. However, NIST also failed to do any investigation into if there was any accelerants or any explosion. If there was a controlled demolition, they did not do any investigation into that, which any good investigation would include that. Anyways, last thing. So you remember the Carlisle group from part 1? So at the end of part 1, I go into the Carlisle group, and they're about to make a comeback. I kept asking myself, like, why would they need to collapse Building 7? What is so significant about Building 7? This is where I couldn't sleep at night. I was thinking about this. I called my dad. I have so many questions. Like, why? What's up with Building 7? Nothing special. All the people were out of it. Like, it's not like they were trying to kill somebody. Something, right? Well, the company that occupied the most space in that building was the company called the Solomon Brothers, or Solomon Smith and Barney, same company, different names. They had multiple different names. They were eventually bought out by Citigroup. They were one of the 5 largest investment banking firms on Wall Street in the 80s and 90s. Like, one of the top 5. They hit number 1, like, largest, biggest, best investment banking company on Wall Street many of those years. But they were always in the top 5 for the 80s and 90s. Well, the Carlisle Group is also a banking firm. They deal with, like, equity and assets and different things. Again, I went over it in the last episode. So they deal with similar things, a little bit of different things, but I tried to look it up. I tried to figure out, like, what were they competing? Like, what was the significance between, Solomon Smith and Barney and the Carlisle Group? good old Google doesn't want you to know. I mean, the world really doesn't want you to know, right? I don't know. Like, what? There's got to be some significance here, because you don't just collapse a building just for funsies. And if their main headquarters in New York was this building 7, then, it makes a lot of sense to just go ahead and get rid of them. And actually, when I looked it up initially, I found that the Solomon Brothers company, they were the number one occupants of building 7. And then I also saw that they were, one of the 5 largest investment banking firms. But I also saw that they had resolved, or they were no longer a company in 2003. I did a little bit more research. Turns out they were just bought out by Citigroup, or Citibank, if you know. I mean, everybody knows Citibank, right? Well, they're bought out. I don't know. It's just odd that Citibank would have to buy them out. Like, were they struggling after this collapse of their building? And you have to think, back in 2001, the internet was still pretty new. Everything being online was still really new. So you had a lot of things, like paper-wise, a lot of things that you would have in your building, in your offices. This collapse could have greatly hurt this company, and maybe that's why they needed to be bought out by Citigroup. Were they competing with the Carlyle Group, or were they a threat to the Carlyle Group? Did the Carlyle Group need them to go away? I don't know, guys. I don't know. Like I said, I had a lot of questions when doing this research. My biggest question was, like, why Building 7? Like, why did they need to collapse Building 7? And that's still my biggest question. When you look it up, there's, like, the conspiracies behind Building 7 are just not as prominent. I mean, you have the same conspiracies, right, as you do the Twin Towers, is that it was a controlled demolition. But I still, like, why? If it was a controlled demolition, which it's, like, looking more and more like it might have been, why? And I'm sure you all have the same question. I mean, you wouldn't listen to this if you didn't. I wish I had the answer for you. I wish I had more information. And if I do, like I said, I'll put out another episode. But Building 7 is a lost building, basically. Like, people don't remember Building 7 collapsed. I watched this whole YouTube video. It was like 3 minutes, about some guy in New York, like, asking New Yorkers, like, do you remember Building 7? They're like, what do you mean? Like, 3 buildings collapsed on 9/11? No, they didn't. Only 2. Well, that's not true. And next time, we're going to get into the Pentagon. We're going to get into Flight 93. We're going to get into, like, all the aftermath of what happened after 9/11 with, like, the Patriot Act and TSA and basically rights that we gave away for funsies because of a terrorist attack on our soil. Which, I mean, the best way to get rid of our freedoms is to scare the people.
Done by me, Dani Mercy.
We'll willingly give our freedoms away if we're terrified that something might hurt us. So,
wherever you're listening,
we're going to get into all that next time. But until then, my friends, stay skeptical. Keep asking why, because there's so many questions. Why is a great question. So, thank you all, and I will see you next week.